Hi, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're at. Mark Becker here with Cathexis Partners. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Mind the Generation Gap, How to Inspire Donors of All Ages. Just to go through a couple of housekeeping tips, first of all, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Drop them in the questions area, and we'll address them at the end. Don't wait to submit them until the end because you might forget what you were going to ask. So as you're thinking of them, feel free to drop those in, and we'll address them at the end. This is being recorded, so if you have to cut out or if you want to share it with a coworker after the fact, we'll be sending out a link to the recording for those that weren't able to attend. But definitely sit back, relax. Just quickly about Cathexis Partners, if you're not familiar, we've been around for coming up on 13 years. We support only nonprofits and higher ed organizations and worked on thousands of projects helping organizations with their technology. We don't have a platform of our own, but we partner up with several different platforms, including Qgiv, and help organizations make the most out of the platforms they're using. Enough about us. Let's move to the main attraction today. Abby's going to be telling us all about all these generations and how we should be talking to them. And I'm very eager to listen to this myself. So with no further ado, take it away.
Thanks. So before I dive into anything, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Abby Jarvis. I'm part of the team over at Qgiv, and my primary job at Qgiv is learning about nonprofit best practices and then sharing them with you. So I know many of you working in the nonprofit world wear a lot of hats, and you don't necessarily have a lot of time to sit down and do a bunch of research. So my job is to do the research for you, and then I hope to share that in a way that makes it easier for you to get some real data-driven, time-proven takeaways that you can apply at your organization to be more successful. So that all said, today I'm going to talk to you about a research study that I did and what it means for you as you are trying to relate to donors of different generations. Nonprofit fundraisers are in a really interesting position right now where you are actively talking to 4 or 5 different generations of donors and potential donors at the same time. So in this presentation, I'm going to look at how each of those donors wants to interact with you. I'm going to show you some tools and some strategies you can use to connect with them. And then we are going to take a special little look at how this applies to peer-to-peer fundraising. So there's a lot to cover, but hopefully you're going to get some really solid takeaways that you can apply to your organization like today. We want it to be very practical. So the question, of course, that I want to answer before we really dive into everything is why you should care about this at all. And the answer is twofold. So there are 2 real reasons to focus on communicating with different generations and their preferred ways. And the first one is sustainability. So you work really hard to acquire new donors, and you work really hard to acquire new peer-to-peer participants if that is a fundraising strategy that you're using. And so you want to get them to stick around. You put all of those resources into acquiring new supporters. We want to keep them. So there is for you, if you're a peer-to-peer fundraiser, an extra level of nuance here, because we know that peer-to-peer donors as a whole often are primarily motivated to donate because they love and want to support the person that is raising money on your behalf. So they might think that you're really wonderful and they might like your organization and your mission, but their familiarity with your mission is probably not the #1 driving factor behind their donation. So we want to really understand what they're looking for out of every interaction with you so you can kind of give them what they want to keep them coming back. Retaining your donors is important, 1, because you spend so much time and effort acquiring them, and that is a great investment, and you want to have as great a return on that investment as humanly possible. So keeping them around boosts that return on your investment, and it makes your fundraising expenditures much more sustainable. It's also a very good way to reduce your dependency quotient. And in case you're not familiar with that term, your dependency quotient reflects the numbers of donors that you depend upon for your revenue. So if you raise $1 million a year and 75,000 of that comes from a handful of major donors or sponsorships, your dependency quotient is very high. If you raise $1 million a year and 75,000 of that comes from a large number of small donations from different donors, your dependency quotient is much lower. So if you depend on a small number of donors, maybe 4 or 5 major donors that reflect a large chunk of your revenue, and you lose one of those donors, that can be a pretty big blow. That's a lot to recover from. But if you have a base of thousands of donors that reflect the majority of your revenue stream and you lose 1 or 2, the impact isn't as dramatic. So having that large base of donors that is consistently interacting with you is a big key to sustainability. The other reason is very closely related. I kind of alluded to it on the previous slide, but you want to retain your donors because those donors reflect such a large investment of time and resources and energy. In 2020, well, I guess it would be closer to 2019. In 2019-ish, donor retention hovered around 45%. So that means if you are like the average nonprofit in the United States, you're losing more than half of the donors that you acquire every year. And that is, again, like it reflects a ton of time and effort and resources. So you want to keep them coming back, and understanding how your donors want to interact with you and then reacting accordingly is a really important part of hanging on to those donors and building a more sustainable fundraising program. So understanding how your donors want to hear from you, how they want to give, how they want to receive updates, all of that will help you build a sustainable revenue stream by retaining your donors and growing that donor base. That's why we created this generational giving report. We really want to help you understand how different donors want to interact with you. So as a little bit of background, so you know where I'm coming from. In this report, we surveyed just over 1,300 donors, and we asked them about their preferences when it comes to interacting with the nonprofits they support. We asked them about how they decide to give. We asked them about how they like to actually make a gift. We asked what they look for in post-donation communications. We looked at a ton of different fundraising facets with this group. And then at the beginning of the survey, we asked each respondent to kind of self-identify with a generational group that they're a part of. And then we were able to split the data based on those generational kind of categories. So we got a really great look at how each generation of donors wants to interact with you. Here's who responded. So people younger than 25, this light blue section here, are Generation Z donors. You may call them Zoomers. I may accidentally refer to them as Zoomers in this presentation. People 25 to 34 in green here are your millennial donors. People 35 to 54 here are Generation X, or the lost generation. We often forget to talk about them. People 55 to 72 are your baby boomer generation. And then this one little section in here are people age 73 and older, and they are the greatest generation. For your own edification, we had such a small number of respondents from this age group that it was very hard to draw any kind of real conclusions about their preferences from the very small sample size. We did notice that their preferences very closely matched the preferences of many of the baby boomer generation. So we did count their responses, but we folded that data into the baby boomer generation responses. So you won't see me call out specifically greatest generation donors, but you will see a lot of conversation around baby boomer donors, and they're part of that group. There were some similarities between all of the generations, and those similarities helped us establish a baseline of who we were talking to during this survey. So I will say that everybody who responded to this all kind of fell into different areas. There were some people who gave thousands and thousands of dollars every year. There were some people who just gave maybe $50 to $100 a year, but this is kind of where the average came from. The average donor here is probably very similar to the average donor at your nonprofit. They generally gave between $100 and $500 a year to charity. Most of those were given in smaller increments of $5 to $55. And I did think it was interesting that the majority of people we surveyed reported that they had supported a nonprofit in the long term. They also reported that they had stopped supporting nonprofits that they had supported long term. So probably very similar to your donor base. Each generation had a slightly different preference about the kind of verticals or causes they liked to support. Now, I will say this, each nonprofit is different, and this may not wholly represent your experiences. You could be an environmentally focused nonprofit, which is generally very popular with Generation Z, and you may not have a lot of Gen Z donors. You may have mostly baby boomer donors, and that cause or vertical doesn't really show up here. This is just an overview of the causes that people like to support, but it does show you that different generations do align with different causes. Now, after we've covered this kind of baseline and overall like snapshot of the study, it's time to get into the fun part, which is looking at each generation, how they decide to give, how they prefer to make their donations, and then what they want from you after the fact. And then we'll take a little kind of bonus round deep dive into peer-to-peer fundraising and what that looks like. So here we have the baby boomers. And the steps that they take when they decide to give are very deliberate and they're very well defined. So almost half of all baby boomers will research your nonprofit before they decide to give. And the things that they're looking for are pretty specific. They want to know that they're supporting a respected nonprofit. They want to know that you are respectable and you're going to take care of them and you're not going to kind of disappear. They want to know that you are financially sound. So they're going to look at your financial reports. Many of them are going to look at third-party evaluation sites like Charity Navigator and GuideStar. They are put off or dissuaded from donating by two things. The two big ones are negative feedback from their family and friends. So if someone that they respect had donated before and had a bad experience, that will weigh heavily on their minds. They also are very turned off by unreasonably high overhead. So you probably don't fall into this category, but if you're spending 85% of your revenue on like fundraising calls, they might think twice about donating to you. When they give, they are also very deliberate. This generation pretty overwhelmingly prefers to donate through direct mail. So 43% of them want to respond to a direct mail appeal. 44% of them want to respond to that direct mail appeal by sending you a physical check. So when you are looking at engaging baby boomer donors, consider sending out a direct mail appeal and make sure you include that self-addressed stamped envelope so they can easily return that check. If they are giving online, they are split almost entirely down the middle about whether or not they want to offset processing costs. So if you have a donation form and you have the little checkbox that lets your donors indicate whether or not they want to add a few cents to their donation to offset those costs, about half of your baby boomer donors will offset those costs and about half won't. They are very interested in receiving receipts and updates, but they're very split about how they want to do it. So despite the fact that 44% of them want to give to you by physical check, a third of your baby boomer donors want to receive an email receipt. So I think that's fascinating. There is definitely some overlap with people who want to give to you with a physical check, but they want an email receipt. That was very surprising. 25% of people who want to donate by that physical check want to receive a receipt in the mail. So consider asking your baby boomer donors how they would like to receive their receipt after they give. They don't expect a ton of updates. They generally want to hear from you about once a quarter with updates about what you've been up to and how their money's been used. And they usually want that through the mail. You do see some people that want emails. And they are most interested in updates that show them financial reports about how their money is used. So baby boomers very often think of their donations as investments in a cause, and they want to know that that money is used wisely. They want to know that you have stewarded it well, and they want to know that it has achieved a real impact. This is slightly different than Generation X. You'll notice that many more Generation X donors will research your organization before they decide to give. And some of the big things that they're going to look for is they're going to look for testimonials, both from your clients, so people who benefit from your services, and from their own family and friends. So if you are putting together a website and you know that people are going to be looking at it as they research you, you may want to consider including some testimonials or stories from people who have benefited from your services. They do also check Google reviews, which is very interesting. So if you don't have any Google reviews from people who either support your organization or have benefited from your services, maybe it's time to do a little push to get some up there. Generation X is interesting in that they are very put off by outdated websites. So if it's been a little while before or since you've updated your website and it kind of looks outdated, it's probably time to give it a little refresh. You'll notice that Generation X is not the only generation that is put off by outdated websites. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Like their baby boomer predecessors, they do look for your kind of third-party evaluation sites. They'll look at Charity Navigator and GuideStar, and they will think twice about donating if there are a lot of poor reviews. So keep an eye on those. Unlike their baby boomer counterparts, this generation largely prefers to give digitally. Around 40% like to give through social media channels. And just to clarify what that means, this doesn't necessarily mean they want to process their donation on Facebook, like you so often can now. What this means is that a lot of them will look at your website or your social media channels, see an appeal, and give by clicking from your social media channel to your website to give. So keep that in mind. Be sure you're asking periodically on your social channels for support. Around 47% of them don't want to actually write you a check or send you a credit card. A lot of them like to donate by giving you stock or other assets. So if you are collecting donations online, consider reaching out to your Generation X donors and giving them alternative options. You could offer planned giving, so asking people to write you into their will. You could look at other asset transfers like large donations of like in-kind materials. Really get a feel for what your unique donor base is interested in donating and kind of act accordingly. A number of these donors, this is interesting to me, like to donate by e-check. So instead of typing in their credit card number, they would rather do an electric fund transfer. So I do see many nonprofit donation forms that don't have the EFT donation option available. If you can, it's a good idea to enable that, specifically if you know that a large number of your donors kind of fall into this age group. And an upside is that very often those EFT transfers have lower processing rates, which is nice for you. The transfer or the processing rates aren't too bad because the Generation X donor cohort is very likely to offset those costs. So you may have a little checkbox like this that gives them the option to give a little extras, and that ensures that more of their gift is actually ending up in your bank account. They have very strong preferences. They really like to get a lot of updates, more updates than their generation or their baby boomer counterparts. Around half of them prefer email receipts. So when you are setting up your donation form, set up an email receipt that goes out to their Generation X donors. They do want those receipts immediately, so it's really great to be able to automate those. And then if you can, drop in a little bit of information that tells them how their gift is going to be used. They already have the warm fuzzy feeling of being able to donate to your organization. Keep those warm fuzzies going by giving them kind of a glimpse at what's going on. They do want to receive updates. They want to receive them slightly more frequently than their baby boomer counterparts. Around a third of them want them once a quarter, around a quarter of them want them once a month. So especially if you are fundraising online, you can try reaching out to your Generation X donors or donors in general and asking them how frequently they want to hear from you and then how they would like to hear from you. They do like updates by personal phone call. This was surprising to me. I generally thought that older donors, so donors in the baby boomer and greatest generations, would prefer to hear from you by phone, and younger donors are actually very into the personal phone calls. I can attest to this. One of my coworkers falls into the Generation X generation. She got a phone call after a gift to an animal shelter. It was the CEO letting her know that they had received the gift, how appreciative they were of it, and just taking a second to say thank you. And she was thrilled. We all heard about it at work. Everyone was very impressed. People really like the personal phone calls. When you're updating them, whether it's in an email update or their automated receipt or a personal phone call, these Generation X donors are looking for information about how their gift was used. So regardless of the kind of campaign you're running, whether it's your annual campaign or a peer-to-peer campaign, do let your donors know how their gift was used after the fact, and that will make them much more likely to give again in the future. We're going to look at the millennials next. You'll notice the younger they get, the more likely donors are to do some research into you. Millennials are no exception. A full 2/3 of millennial donors will research your organization before deciding to give. And as a general rule, they're going to look at your social media channels first. So social media is going to be increasingly important as donors get younger. They really are going to look for updates. So what you've been doing, how you've been using the money that people give to you, what the actual tangible work is that your organization is doing. They're also going to look for testimonials, both from your clients, so people who benefit from your services, and they're going to look for updates from other donors, volunteers, or board members. So anyone that's involved in your organization that can give a good kind of glimpse at what it's like to interact with your organization is going to be a benefit to you. They are, no surprise, based on how they like to research you, they're very put off by poor social media presence, and they're very put off by inconsistent communications. So you may have heard people like me talk about how if you are going to put together a presence on a social media channel, it's important to regularly update. It's better to have 1 or 2 active social media channels than it is to be present on 4 or 5 and not update frequently. So really focus on quality over quantity when it comes to choosing the number of channels you're going to use. This group is increasingly digital and they are increasingly mobile. So almost a full 1/3 of millennial donors want to give to you by text message or app. And this is interesting because when we asked them how they wanted to give, respondents were able to indicate a bunch of different ways. So if you are comfortable donating on an app or online or by check, you could indicate all of those, but we ask you to rank things in terms of preference. So this group very much likes to donate by app or text. So if you haven't explored those avenues and you're looking to reach a larger base of millennial donors, adding an app or a text-based option is a good move. A lot of these people also want to donate by a digital payment system. So when we say digital payment system, that means things like PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Wallet, anything that they don't actually have to go dig around in their purse and pull out their card. An interesting number of these millennials want to give by e-check. I was surprised that more than a quarter of millennials said that they liked giving by e-check. I am a millennial, and full disclosure, I don't think I even have a checkbook. So this was very interesting to me. I thought that people my age were not going to want to dig out their checkbook and set up an EFT. I was totally wrong. Data is shocking sometimes. If you are looking at whether or not you want to include information about your tax deductibility on your website, your donation form, anything, millennials and their other counterparts are only kind of moderately motivated by tax deductibility. almost everyone in this age group said that having the ability to claim a donation on their taxes was a nice perk, but it wasn't really important to them. You probably saw an increasing number of donors kind of lose interest in tax deductibility when they changed the itemization laws around donations. So feel free to include that information on your donation form and anywhere else you're really making appeals, but that shouldn't be your primary driving reason to give. This group, like Generation X, are very likely to offset processing fees for their gifts. So if you are worried about whether or not your donors will be put off by you giving them the option, rest assured they expect it, and they're very likely to actually choose to give you a little extra to offset those costs. This group, like Generation X, likes receipts. Whereas Generation X said that they wanted those receipts immediately, Millennials are a little more chill. They want it within 24 hours. But if you're automating your receipts anyway, they're not going to be upset with you for getting them their receipt too quickly. They want to receive regular follow-ups and updates. They look for those more regularly than some of the older donors, and they are going to look on social media. Shocking, since we know that they go there anyway. They are particularly interested in story-based follow-ups. So we know baby boomers and Generation X like testimonials and kind of they like assets that kind of tell them like, this is a trustworthy organization that you know will use your donation well. Millennials are a little more interested in hearing the story about how their donation is going to help. So consider adding some narrative story-based examples in your social media updates. And then if you have the time and resources, this group really does appreciate a personal phone call. This is a question that I get very frequently when I'm talking about personal phone calls. If you decide to start making personal phone calls and you get a lot of voicemails, don't be discouraged. Leaving a voicemail counts just as much as actually talking to someone. I think especially with Millennial and Generation Z donors, you will get a lot of phone call screening. I know I don't answer the phone if I don't recognize your phone number, and if you're a nonprofit, you're probably not in my phone book. So if you decide to start reaching out to donors by making personal phone calls, don't be distressed if they don't answer the phone. Leaving a voicemail has as positive an impact as actually talking to someone. Now it's time to dig into Generation Z. This is the youngest generation. And I will say that we had a pretty small group of Generation Z respondents. And I want to give you a little bit of insight into this. So I think the cutoff for Generation Z is 27-ish, 23, 27. And that leaves a very small gap of people who we talked to. We did not interview anyone under the age of 18. So this Generation Z breakdown covers the older Generation Z members, if that kind of makes sense to you. So I can't say that this represents all Generation Z as a whole, but it does represent the Gen Z donors that are probably actively engaging with you right now. A little drop in the percentage of research here, 57, we'll look into you, 57%. They are most inspired by stories. They're going to look at your social media channels, which you should probably be used to at this point. I've told you now that 3 groups of donors will look at that. Interestingly, this is the only generation that indicated that they look at local media when they're deciding to give. So if you are looking to engage young donors, explore building relationships with local media outlets, whether that is bloggers and influencers or local TV channels. Regardless of what you do, keeping that social media presence updated is important. We know that it puts off Millennials, and it also is kind of off-putting to Generation Z if you don't have an active presence on the channels that you already use. And like Generation X, this group is also put off by outdated websites. So if you're looking to interact with this group, build relationships with those local media outlets, keep your website updated, and keep your social media channels active. I'm going to be very honest with you. This group has some pretty wacky giving preferences, and I don't entirely understand them. I wish I could have isolated some of these respondents and asked them what they meant when they said that they wanted to give these ways. So a third of them want to give by social media or through social media channels. That was expected. I was very thrown off when they said that 41% of them wanted to donate by stock or asset transfers. I don't know a lot of 19-year-olds that have enough stock that they want to do a stock transfer to a nonprofit they support. What I suspect is that the asset transfer here refers to in-kind donations. That is totally a hunch. It is based almost entirely on my interactions with Generation Z donors. So do with that what you will. Maybe don't expect a ton of real estate transfers from your very young donors, but you never know. Interestingly, around a third of them said that they were interested in digital currencies. So I'm not saying that you need to immediately look into how to accept Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of those digital currencies, but it is something that may become more popular as this age group of donors ages up, develops a little more disposable income that they can give to nonprofits. Just something to keep an eye on. You don't have to do anything with that right now, but it's an interesting tidbit. Like their other predecessors, this group is not particularly motivated by tax deductibility, but they are very likely to offset their processing costs. So that is now 3 generations of donors of the 4 that we looked at that are interested in helping you out by giving you a little extra with their donations. They are even more laid back than Generation X and Millennials. Gen X wants their receipts immediately. Millennials want it within 24 hours. Gen Z is like, as long as I get it within 48 hours, I'm good. You'll notice that they do want to receive more updates than their older predecessors. They generally want to see updates around once a month, and they also are very inspired by stories. And then the fact that they are into social media was not surprising to me. The fact that they indicated that they like personal phone calls was very surprising to me. So if you are really wondering whether or not it's going to be worth it to call some of these donors, I assure you, you're probably going to make their day by calling them and just thanking them for their gift. But do be prepared to just leave a voicemail, because I have a hunch not a lot of these people are going to be answering their phone calls for a number that they're not familiar with. So I just looked at 4 generations. I gave you a pretty good level of detail about what they want, but how can you take all of that information and boil it down to a single strategy where you can give each generation what they're looking for? The way you can cover the most possible bases is pretty simple. So keep your social media channels updated and active. Periodically update your website. That is, when I say update your website, that means both kind of design and copy. So you could be posting regular updates to your website, but if your website design hasn't been updated since like 2010, it probably looks outdated, and that is going to be equally as off-putting. Start sending direct mail updates quarterly, and then adjust your timing as necessary. So if you are like most nonprofits, you probably get most of your fundraising revenue from baby boomer donors. And so it's important not to neglect them. Your boomer donors are probably looking at your social media channels, but they do really want those direct mail updates. If you notice that you're sending those updates out quarterly and it's just not really resonating with them, that's totally fine. Adjust from there. Your donor base is unique, and you are going to be the authority on how frequently they want to hear from you and in what ways. If you are totally stumped and you don't really know what your donors want, try surveying them. You can use tools like SurveyMonkey is a good one that is either no cost or low cost. And just ask your donors what they want from you. Do they want a monthly website update? Would they rather just get an email newsletter? Are they really into Facebook and they don't really care about Twitter? So you can kind of shut down your Twitter and focus all your energy on Facebook. Just ask them what they're looking for. You may be surprised at how ready your donors are to share their preferences, because they do care about you. They want to hear from you, and they really value your desire to connect with them in a good, positive way. I do want to get very specific about attrition. So whether or not you are encountering donors that are giving to your annual fund or talking to donors who have supported your peer-to-peer campaigns, it is important to understand why donors continue to give, and more importantly, why donors decide not to give to you. So the majority of each donor group we surveyed indicated that they had given long-term support to an organization, and the majority of them said that they had also ended that support. So I want to look at why. So here's the top 3 reasons for each generation. And at first glance, it looks like each generation has a very different reason for not continuing long-term support. But if you look a little closer, there are some really interesting patterns that start coming out. So the first pattern relates to donors' perception of how their money was actually used. So baby boomers and Generation X told us that the one of the top reasons they decided not to continue giving is because they didn't feel like their money was used wisely. Millennials felt like their gift didn't matter, and Generation Z stopped giving because they never received any information about how their money was put to work. So they're all different, but at the core, each of these issues can be addressed by sending periodic impact updates. Let donors know that their gift matters, show them how you invested that money and that it was used well and that it made a good impact, and then let them know the impact that that support made. One well-crafted impact report can cut down on attrition in all 4 donor groups. And this doesn't have to be one of those long annual reports that goes out through the mail and costs $1 million to print and send. This can be as simple as an update email that you send out once a quarter, letting them know what you've been up to, telling them that they've made a difference, and then showing them some of what their gift has accomplished. The next pattern that we were able to identify relates to the frequency with which donors are being asked for donations. So check this out. Baby boomers felt like they were asked too often. All of the other generations reported that they were never asked to give again. So why is that happening? The answer is probably in the way that nonprofits are connecting with different generations through different channels. Baby boomers are the only generation that really like direct mail. They're also the only ones that feel like they're being asked too frequently. So if you focus on sharing your impact on social media and on your website, but you're not sharing that impact through direct mail with this group of donors that really prefers direct mail, those donors are really only getting appeals through their preferred communication channel. So if you do 6 mailings a year, well, 5 mailings a year, you do a quarterly appeal every quarter, so that's 4, and then you are sending 1 impact report. Your donors in this age group are being asked 4 times more frequently than they're getting updates. On the other side, if you are looking at donors who like to interact with you on a digital level, they are online looking for updates. They're seeing a lot of updates, but they may not be asked for gifts here. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm a monthly donor for a conservancy group in Georgia. They post breathtaking pictures all the time. I know that their trails are open after the snow melt. I know what events they have coming up, but I never really get appeals from them online or on their social media channels. So sharing your updates on those channels is important, but if you want to capture these 3 generations, it's important to ask for support at least periodically. You don't want only to ask for support, but you do want to get some appeals in there. I also wanted to look at this little area here. The 2 younger generations have something very interesting in common. Both Millennial and Generation Z donors reported that very often they couldn't afford their continued support. If you are like most organizations, donations from Millennials and Generation Z are probably a pretty small percentage of your overall revenue. That is usually because they're younger donors and they have less disposable income than their more well-established counterparts. This does make them excellent candidates for peer-to-peer fundraising. Your Millennial and Zoomer donors may not be able to donate to you financially. They may not be able to actually give you dollars, but they can donate their time and their voice and access to their personal networks. So very interesting insight into those two groups. And that brings me to peer-to-peer fundraising. I wanted to take a quick dive into how each generation kind of perceives peer-to-peer fundraising and how you can use these donor preferences to make your next peer-to-peer campaign a little more efficient. So baby boomers first, a little over half of them are willing to participate in a peer-to-peer event, and about half of them aren't willing to participate in a peer-to-peer event. They will donate to a peer-to-peer event, but they're not super excited about actually setting up a peer-to-peer fundraising page and asking for support. So if you are looking for ways to engage your baby boomer donors in your peer-to-peer campaign, try highlighting your upcoming peer-to-peer event in a direct mail campaign. You don't necessarily need to ask them to participate in this direct mailing, but just let them know what's going on. Let them know why you're raising that money. If your campaign does have an in-person event kind of that is the culmination of the whole fundraising period, invite them to attend. They may be willing to donate to your event, even if they aren't actually that excited about participating in it. You can also kind of engage them just by asking them to share things. You may not get them to like raise money for you, but they may be willing to invite their friends and family to the culminating event. The Generation X group is much more likely to participate. Around, or almost exactly 70% of them are willing to ask their friends and family for support. And if you want to increase their participation in your upcoming event, look at these few things. We know that they are very driven by understanding their own impact on a particular cause. So emphasize how their participation will help make a difference and what they will achieve when they participate. Do update your social media channels pretty regularly with highlights, both highlights on what you're accomplishing with the money that they're raising, but also by kind of giving people shout outs for the cool things that they're doing when they're raising money for you. And then do focus on consistent communication. This group tends to be professionals, they've got families, they're very busy, and they want to receive regular updates so they know what's going on. Millennials are even more likely to participate in these peer-to-peer events. Only 20% said that they wouldn't be that excited about doing it. So if you want to engage this group of people, ask them to participate and appeal to their desire to make a difference. Millennials are very motivated by the idea of making a difference in the world. You can appeal to that desire to make a difference and then showing them how they can do it. The other thing you can do here is emphasize social media activity. This group is very active on social media and they are very likely to engage with you there, share your posts, share their own posts asking for support. And then try to keep them engaged by inviting them to get their friends involved. This group is very motivated by interacting with their peers, and emphasizing peer engagement is really important. This is especially important for this age group because they are one of the two age groups that are most likely to stop supporting because they can't afford it anymore. So they want to help. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a great way to do it. If you have a millennial donor who is very engaged in your peer-to-peer fundraising, give them other ways to get involved. Ask them to help coach other peer-to-peer participants. Ask them to volunteer other ways. Just give them a way to act on that desire to make a difference, even if they can't actually donate to you. And then Generation Z is the most likely to participate with you. More than 82% are excited about participating with you this way. This group is also very motivated by making a difference. This group also doesn't have a ton of disposable income, so give them a way to support you by participating in your peer-to-peer event. Invite them to get their friends involved. This group is most likely to donate their time and influence if their friends are also doing it. And then reiterate that their participation can make a difference even if they aren't actually writing you a check or giving you cash. So I just threw a ton of information at you in a very short period of time. So I want to kind of bring it all together by going over some of the key takeaways and how you can apply this to your nonprofit. So first, do know that donors of all generations want to give to you. And then remember that while the generation gaps may seem pretty wide, especially if you read the news or if you get on Facebook and you don't know what a TikTok is, like I didn't for a very long time. Your donors are more similar than you think. They have similar motivations, they have similar needs and wants. One of the biggest things that you can do to appeal to donors of all ages is show them that they are actually making a difference and telling them what that difference is. I do want to encourage you to use this information as a starting point for your communication plans, but remember your donor base is unique and you have a unique mission, and one size doesn't necessarily fit all. Start here and then tweak as you go. Do remember that social media is important, but it's not the end all be all of fundraising communications. Sometimes analog methods like direct mail and phone calls and handwritten notes are a huge important piece, even to your young donors who don't necessarily answer the phone, but are excited to hear from you that way. So I threw a lot of information at you. Mark, do we have any questions?
Yeah, that's a lot of great info, and we've actually got several questions come in. Great questions, and just a reminder, if you have some questions, go ahead and drop them in here into the chat area, and we will get to them. One of the first questions was, I think it was around slide 12 or so. You had mentioned 44% of baby boomers want to donate via check. Can that literally, is it reverse true then that should we believe that 56% donate online, or is there some other variables and some other folks in there?
Yeah. So we ask people to indicate all of the ways that they are looking at giving. 44% was the largest group, or the most popular method. So not to say that 66% only want to donate online. That means that other 66% was spread out over things like e-check, credit card, stock and asset transfer, and things like that. One thing that has been really interesting, especially as we navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a lot of donors who traditionally donated by check switch to donating online because nonprofit staff just weren't available to receive and cash checks. So baby boomer donors aren't only going to donate to you online, they are comfortable doing so. We just had 44% of respondents in that age group say that that was a way they preferred to give, if that is at all clarifying.
It does, yeah, thanks. And on slide 23, you mentioned like sending out quarterly updates via direct mail on things. Could that be also via email?
Yes, I think that sending those quarterly updates by both direct mail and email is a really valuable way to engage people. So one thing that it's hard to communicate really effectively here because it's mostly a hunch. We saw that the data implied that there was a division in the baby boomer generation. Older baby boomers are much more likely to really cling to direct mail. Younger baby boomers are much more comfortable online. And then we saw that many Generation X donors wanted direct mail updates and email appeals. So that is where having really good kind of donor information in your CRM can be really valuable. Maybe a baby boomer donor doesn't want a direct mail update. Maybe they want it by email, and maybe a Generation X donor wants to get the mail and not an email. So yeah, I would suggest starting with a quarterly update. If people indicate that they're not that interested in receiving direct mail, then don't do it. If you are getting tons of online interaction, if you've got great open rates on your quarterly updates, but you're not really getting much feedback from those direct mail appeals, then you don't need to do them. You can just pivot to give your donors what they want.
Yep. I think a lot of all of this, you're basically saying, collect this information, learn more about your donors, right? I mean, that's the nature of a lot of this. Know their age, because it seems like based on some of these questions, it doesn't seem like a few folks on the line here listening today, they don't know the ages of their donors or what generation they belong to. So it's a matter of getting that information in there, right?
It is, yeah. And that's always kind of a tricky thing to do. I mean, best practice says that you want to keep your forms pretty short. And that's where I really think there's a lot of value in, one, having a team that's invested in getting to know your donors, and then two, having a periodic survey asking people what they want. I know I have been seeing more of those from nonprofits. I've gotten several this month actually, and they ask, I mean, demographic things. They want to know how old I am I married, do I have kids, how did I get involved? But a lot of the other things that you can ask in a survey are really great fundraising tools. So why did you start donating to us? Do you have a personal connection to our cause? Things like that will help you dial in how your donors want to communicate with you, but it also gives you insight into what you're doing that is inspiring them. And then you can use that information to plan accordingly.
Yeah, good stuff. I missed the point you made about how frequently is a turnoff for baby boomers in number of times they receive an appeal. We struggle finding the right balance, and our internal team has differences of opinions. Any insight there?
Do you mean number of baby boomers who respond to appeals?
The frequency, how often
Okay.
they should receive an appeal, how frequently.
So we didn't ask our survey respondents how frequently they want to receive an appeal. I'll say this, the data shows that baby boomers who, especially those who are very interested in communicating with you by mail, feel like they're being asked too frequently. And that is a topic of much debate in the nonprofit world, because there is this idea that donors only become fatigued by appeals if they don't understand how their money is being used. So think of it as like your nephew. If you give your nephew 50 bucks and you never hear from him again, or you never hear a thank you, or he doesn't tell you like that
That
he
sounds
just
right.
college textbook, and then he comes back to you next quarter and asks for another $50, you're not going to be that stoked about giving him $50. But if you give him $50 and you get a text message or a sweet phone call the next week and you say, you know, Aunt Abby, thank you so much for giving me that. This is what I did with it. It really helped me out in a tough spot. You're going to be more likely to give to him in the future. So I think a lot of nonprofits start with maybe twice a year, like a spring and a winter appeal or a spring and a fall appeal. But take a look at the responses that you're getting and make sure when you're asking that each ask has a corresponding update. If you have those updates coming in frequently, you won't have to worry as much about asking too often, because your donors, even if they can't give to you, are comfortable with the idea of supporting you because you know you're using their money correctly. If that makes sense.
Totally does. And I think this is kind of along that same lines. Someone says, as a baby boomer on the younger cusp, I do not like receiving too much mail from nonprofits, as I consider that as using my donation in wasteful ways. As a fundraiser, I understand the need for some outreach, but too much turns me off. So again, you know, it's kind of like, where's that sweet spot in frequency? And you just got to ask them what they're interested in, right? How they want to hear from you. And another kind of question in that same arena is, do you have a sample survey for preferred communications channels? And it's just about making sure you ask, you know, questions and in a way that doesn't seem like it's intrusive, right? You're just trying to learn more about how they want to hear from you, right?
Yeah. I will use Brother Wolf Animal Rescue as an example. They're a client of ours. I've donated to a couple of their campaigns. And it's interesting that a younger baby boomer doesn't want to receive the mail. I get it, because postage is expensive and there's the resource aspect of it. I get their emails weekly, but I'm more likely to read their direct mail appeals and respond that way. I go online to give, but I respond to the direct mail because I get 500 emails a day and I don't really get any direct mail. So one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at this study and any other study is that this is all a good place to start, but your donors are your donors, and your donor base is totally unique. So if you aren't comfortable sending the number of direct mail appeals that you're currently sending, pull back and see if those donors are interested in engaging with you online. You may be surprised.
Awesome. That's all the questions I'm seeing right now. Definitely, again, feel free to drop them in the line, or our contact information is here if you want to follow up with us after the fact. But even in the chat and questions, lots of shout outs for the information you shared today. Really appreciate it. Great job, Abby, and thanks everybody for attending. And Abby, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Of course. I hope that everybody took away at least one thing they can try. And if your donors are, or if your board members are conflicted about how to move on with this, feel free to point them toward this research study and ask them to engage with you that way.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, everyone, have a good day.